Hi, friends. Welcome to the Full and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, and if you're here, it means you're ready for some aha moments that will inspire you to create a more vibrant, authentic life that's full of joyful moments, deeper connection, inner peace, and courageous action towards your dreams. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you're living in a constant state of fight or flight mode? Or do you ever feel so overwhelmed that you just shut down and then you beat yourself up for not doing enough? Or maybe the opposite. You feel like you are always go, go, go and cannot slow down, even if your life depended on it. And you just have so much trouble dropping into your body and feeling present. In this episode, I talked to Stefanie Michele, a binge eating and body image coach who has joined me today for a conversation on regulating the nervous system. Today, Stefanie teaches us how to slow down and reconnect with our bodies so that we can be more present and get more out of life through and with our bodies. This episode is full of some really helpful wisdom that I know will change your life. So buckle up and get ready for this episode of Full and Thriving. Hello, Stefanie. How are you today?
Hi, Meg. I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing so good. It's so great to finally chat with you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Well, before we dive into, our topic today, which is nervous system regulation and stress and burnout and how all of those things are related, I would love to hear more about you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. Gosh, there's a lot of things in my background. So I am a binge eating recovery coach and a body image coach, but I also more recently started looking at somatic therapy. So I've been training to become a somatic therapist, which I know a lot of people don't know what that even is. And I didn't either a few years back, and I can get into it. But I started looking at that because I was working with people who had a lot of background with trauma, whether that was capital T trauma or lowercase t trauma, just a lot of patterns were coming up in the work that I was doing around that. And it started to help make me think about my own history with anxiety and depression and my relationships and the way I handle stress. And, those kind of puzzle pieces started informing what I was doing around food and body image coaching. And it became kind of this larger concept. So I'm kind of self-evolving alongside of my own work. And outside of that, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I live in New Jersey. I grew up around here. I'm an occupational therapist by training, and I recovered from an eating disorder after 25 years. So I've had a lot of different things going on in my life, and I live to tell the tale.
I love that. Thank you for giving such a comprehensive overview of who you are and the background you bring. I think everything kind of informs where you arrive, right? And it sounds like you are transforming a little bit, just like I'm transforming. The show's officially transformed. So one thing I'm curious about is, what exactly is somatic therapy?
Okay. So somatic means of the body. And that wouldn't have piqued my interest at any point, mostly because I'm a thinker and I prefer to stay cerebral and to intellectualize everything and to psychoanalyze everything. I love it. I love therapy. But I had a lot of, how sometimes you're in therapy or you're on social media and reading Instagram posts and you're putting a lot of pieces together and you're having a lot of insight, but your behaviors aren't changing or the feelings aren't changing. I was like, there must be some kind of missing element here. And I started to think about the way that you can sometimes know something in your head, but not feel something in your body. Like, something is true, but you don't feel like it's true or something like that. Comes up a lot in body image work. And I don't remember. I don't even remember how I came across it, but this idea of a somatic therapist and I ended up sort of talking and getting to know each other a little bit. And she was talking about the way that the body is like part of that knowing, and that the part of our system is through our nervous system and what the nervous system is telling us and how that's different from what the brain is telling us and like our conscious knowing. So long story short, I kind of got into somatic therapy on my own. And that was looking at the way that my sort of nervous system was processing information, processing stress, and how it needed a much longer trajectory of like handling stress than my brain did. So my brain would understand something and get over it. But my body was like holding on to stuff. And that would show up in terms of like, I would have tension headaches, or I would have stomach sort of disruption and digestive distress, or I would have rapid heart rate, or just this feeling of tension in the body that I kind of was operating at a level like that most of the time. So I started to sort of look at the body and to understand like what's going on in my body that's giving me information that my brain isn't able to give me. And how do we work with that? And how do we help it? Like, how do we process stuff that might be getting stuck in the body and process it through? So somatic therapy is not talk therapy. It does involve talking. And of course, there's parts, we're obviously communicating, but it's stopping the talking a lot of the time to sort of pause and interject in the spaces where you can see an emotion kind of come up in someone's storytelling, or you can see their body sort of bristle at a memory or close off a little bit when they're talking about a certain person in their lives or something like that. It's kind of stopping and interrupting and just kind of checking in with the body and learning what signals are coming from that and where things might be happening, and then giving it lots of time and space to like tell its own story and to come up and process through. So it's totally different than most things are that we've previously come to identify as therapy.
Well, I love that you bring up that interesting piece of the puzzle where sometimes logically, intellectually, we understand things. We know we need to take action on something, but then we're holding ourselves back in some way. And so what I'm hearing you explain is that sometimes the body is holding us back in a way because it's still processing what the brain's already processed, which is such an amazing and interesting concept to me. Could you share a little bit more about that example in your life? Like, what were you experiencing so the listeners can kind of wrap their heads around that a little more?
Yeah, and that's a great question because examples are always so helpful. So I grew up quite a timid child, and I guess you would have described me as shy. I did not have a lot of self-confidence. And I grew up in a household where there was an alpha. And there was, like sort of like a what I say goes kind of idea out there, that I lived in. And so I kind of learned, that what I said didn't necessarily get seen, didn't necessarily matter. Maybe it wasn't worth saying. So that's childhood, right? And all this stuff happens in childhood and we just keep going our merry way. And as an adult, what I was noticing is that in times where I had an opinion about something or I felt strongly about something, that I would be in conversation with someone. Now, this wouldn't be friends or family. It might be like in the workplace. And I used to be an occupational therapist, and I might have thoughts about a patient that we were seeing. And I would notice that I would sort of freeze in conversation, not visibly, not like in a way that you might pick up on. Also my mind would go blank and I wouldn't be able to like articulate what I know that like outside of that moment I thought and I could get in touch with. Actually, I used to say like, I'm just so boring. I never can think of anything to say, which I've learned to not be true at all. I have lots to say, but I was sort of going to this freeze state, and it was kind of understanding like outside of it, my brain was like, why can't you, say points A, B, and C? Like, why aren't you able to connect with yourself in conversation? There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing wrong with your opinions. They're valid. Like intellectually, yes, we understand. But something in the body was sort of saying, you can't, like, just hold back because, and of course, I didn't know what because was. Like, I don't know. But the body was kind of saying like, there's a pattern we're detecting here of like, if you say something, you might just get steamrolled, or maybe that's going to be invalidated. Maybe like you're going to feel stupid if you say something. And, without being able to understand like why I was freezing in social situations, because cognitively it didn't make sense, but the body was kind of still holding on to these stories I had growing up around not speaking up and not feeling safe enough to speak up. And that might not get me anywhere at the end of the day and might even get me in trouble. So slowing that process down and learning how to work through like the freeze, which is an element of the nervous system that we can talk about, was helpful for me to sort of break down what the body was still holding on to in terms of fear and in terms of like just what made sense for it based on memory. It wasn't still true in my current moment, but it was true at one time. And the body was still kind of like remembering that and saying like, hey, maybe we want to just pause here instead of rushing to say something and just in case. Does that make sense?
I love that. I feel like that example made me think of a bajillion moments in my life. And I feel like all the listeners probably have thought of an example where they were almost in that sort of a situation. I had situations, especially when I started working, where I was in rooms with people who had a lot of authority and I was like the entry level person, and I would just freeze. I would not know what to say, even though I was working passionately alongside of them. there's a part of me that felt I wasn't worthy enough or good enough or smart enough to hang with them in that meeting. So I'm like totally relating to everything you're saying. And I'm sure others are as well. So can you kind of explain, like with that example you just provided, how the nervous system is coming into play there?
Sure. So there's three parts of the nervous system. One part is kind of the most, what we'd call regulated, and it's calm, but it's not always just calm. It's like, it's connected. It's connected to others. It's connected to yourself. It's like, I can take a breath here. Everything's okay. I can handle stress in this space. There's nothing threatening going on. There's nothing that's alerting my nervous system that there's something wrong. It's just a very like regulated and like safe, connected part of the nervous system. It's where you might think a very well-adjusted human lives most of the time. And that's a part that we can all tap into, hopefully, sometimes, usually when we're feeling the most comfortable and the most safe and when there's not really lots of stress happening. And then there's the sympathetic part of the nervous system, which is not levels, but it's another branch. And basically that part of the nervous system is where we have to mobilize into action based on some kind of perceived threat. And there's levels of that. So for example, when you have a work deadline, you might go up into that part of the nervous system because you do have to like sort of produce something. There is a certain amount of stress involved. And that's appropriate. Like we need to have mobilization towards stress. And, we need to sort of gear up and the energy heightens and we might, our heart might beat a little faster and we're a little bit more conscious of like smaller things going on in the environment. And we're a little more like peaked to be aware, a little bit more vigilant. I mean, there's a huge spectrum of that state. And it's productive to a point and we need to be in it to a point, and then we need to finish the assignment we're working on or hand the paper in or do whatever it is. Then we need to come back down. And, sort of like that's the trajectory of like a healthy nervous system. But what happens is that a lot of times we're getting stuck up in that state, I think for a whole host of reasons that we can talk about. And it might start to escalate so that we're now like running on that, what we call fight or flight. And we're just like hanging out up there and we can't seem to get out. We're just like chronically busy and chronically on the go and chronically nervous and chronically, chronically vigilant. And I mean, people can live there. I lived there for a really long time. And I don't think I ever really came out, even to sleep. I was like racing around in my dreams. And then if you hang out there for too long, or if a threat or stress becomes too high, you might tip over into the third branch, which is the freeze state, more commonly known as the freeze state. It's called dorsal vagal. But this is the place where your body's like, okay, we are just like, this is all too much. There's too much stress happening, too long amount of time. It's just too intense. I have to like get out of here. I'm going to shut down. Like, I'm just going to shut down. I'm going to start to like not be able to move. You're not going to be able to get off the couch. Like, I mean, technically you can, but the motivation's just not there. The energy is low. We feel really tired. We feel really foggy. Sometimes some people, if it's really intense, can feel like they just can't move. And that's, again, an adaptive part of the nervous system that is very old and we don't really need it anymore. But we did at one time need it to actually freeze and to not be perceived by predators, essentially. And so it's a protective shutdown that, again, you can also get stuck in. So the dysfunction or the dysregulation of the nervous system is happening where we're getting stuck in one of those latter two places instead of being able to come back into that kind of green zone of calm and connection. And nervous system regulation work looks at like why we're getting stuck, how to safely get unstuck, and like the long in-depth processes that involves.
I really appreciate those explanations that you just gave. And for clarity here, that dorsal vagal state, would you say that's when someone's reached burnout?
Yeah, that's like the pinnacle of burnout, where it's been hanging out in the fight or flight for just far too long. And then the body's just like, I can't anymore. That's where everything crashes down. Because when you're in the fight or flight, you're like, I'm just going to keep going. And you keep producing. And then there's this place where you almost hit this wall. And you're like, I don't feel motivated. I don't feel connected. I don't have anything in me. Like I don't have the gas in my tank anymore. And yeah, that would be where burnout starts to really show up as problematic. At least that's where we're calling it problematic.
Yep. Okay. It's probably problematic before that if you're not taking any breaks. So you mentioned people just getting stuck in there. What are some of the factors that might keep a person stuck in that sympathetic state or that kind of burnout state?
So I think a lot of it has to do with this world we live in because it's really not helping us restore, right? So when we're in, and these are two different parts of it. So let's say we're talking about the sympathetic, the fight or flight, the go state. Well, the world really likes that. Like we have a lot to do. We have a lot of places to be, a lot of things to be on top of, like a lot of jobs to complete. Like we have lots of roles. Like there's just a relentlessness about the pace of life today. So we're not able necessarily to hear when too much is too much because it feels normal. And even if we can hear it, it's not really applauded to slow down. Like, you just got to keep going. You know what I mean? Like, if you're sick, you go to work anyway. Like, if you need to take a break and rest, but your kids have 50 activities they have to be at, you got to bring them anyway. Like, we don't live in a place that really like warms towards like the idea of slowing down. So if we can't offer the body what it's looking for in a state like that, we're going to stay there. And then that's going to not help us, but it's going to tip us into that like freeze state. And again, what happens in freeze states in that actual shutdown is shame. And I mean, all the way I'm explaining it now is not how we're thinking about it, right? What all we're seeing is like, I'm so lazy. I can't get out of bed. What is wrong with me? I'm so tired all the time. Like, it must be my, like pillows or something. And we're not able to understand like what's going on. And if we are, we just think it's a character deficit. So that shame is only like perpetuating the need to escape. Because like if we're hearing our self-critic in our ear all the time, then we're going to be like, okay, we better stay frozen because I don't want to go back out there into that place that's so busy and like wagging its finger at me all the time. Like, the whole point of me shutting down was to be able to like actually restore. You can't restore when you're criticizing yourself. So most of the time, most of the people that I work with who are in shutdown are extremely ashamed of it and extremely down on themselves. And therefore, it's not allowing the body to do what it's actually trying to do in that state.
Wow. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And so I assume, did you reach that shutdown point at some point in your life? And how did you handle that?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I did reach that point in my life when I was younger. So when I was in my early 20s, I actually hit that point. I mean, there was none of this conversation happening. No idea. There was not even social media at that time. So I basically just shut down in it. And it took me 10 years to come out of it. I was a shell of a human at that point. I really hated myself almost at that time and just was like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? I more recently kind of entered more of a burnout, but I stayed in the fight or flight. I never tipped over. And that's possible too. And I want to mention that not every system will tip over into burnout, but I stayed chronically in fight or flight and ended up not getting a period and not, like I had anxiety to the point of having panic attacks and things like that. I was kind of living in that sympathetic high all the time and couldn't get out of it. So there were almost like two ways that has manifested for me in two different states. And if you ask me like how I got out of it, I was like, in both cases, I suppose it was a matter of complete surrender. Like, I at some point realized that I wasn't getting anywhere. And it was kind of an accident that the first time I just sort of like, I think I allowed eventually myself to cocoon enough and to just really not show up in a way that, again, I wasn't on board with. It didn't feel like a choice, but it was just something that my body like did until I was able to sort of come back. And in the most recent case with anxiety, that's when I ended up recovering from an eating disorder after that.
Wow. Thank you for being so transparent with both of those different states in your life. And it's really eye-opening to think that someone could be stuck in that state for 10 years. Like you mentioned, feeling a state of shame for 10 years is such a long time. So it's no wonder you've been really opening up to this idea of somatic therapy, right? And this idea of regulation of the nervous system, because it answers probably so many questions that you had during that time.
Yes, this idea to me, when I learned about this, it made so much sense because I know that I'm not a lazy person. I know that I'm not a disconnected person. I know that I'm not somebody who has no ideas, to my point about freezing. And like, I know this, but it kind of gave me this lens on, okay, maybe there's stuff going on outside of my awareness, like that I'm not perceiving because it's happening under that level. And this makes much more sense than it does for it to have been just a matter of not having enough willpower. Like, that just never felt true. So this was an angle I could really like get into. And the more that I've learned about it and the more that I've trained in it and the more I have clients who are going through these exact things, understanding like, right, we're not all lazy people or anxious people even. It's just that like there's a series of things that happen that will put a nervous system in this place. And when you can work with that, you can watch someone come out of it. So it does follow like the trajectory of the theory, like when you actually put it in action, implement it with people and help their nervous systems feel safe enough to actually move through what they're asking to move through.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, like, do you have any like I guess, practices for people who are living in that dysregulated state, how they could start bringing themselves back down to that more calmer, connected place.
Yeah. So I think about it, I suppose, in like two different ways. One is like the acute moment, and one is this longer term thing, right? So when I'm saying I was in shame for 10 years, that didn't mean I literally never got off a couch for 10 years. Like there were times when I, certainly like went out and did things, but in grand scheme, there was a lot of like low energy. So, talking about it in the longer term way, more of an overarching way, I think like learning about this is one of the most important things to do. Like just kind of keeping your ears open for people or books or podcasts or articles that are talking about what this is and learning about it and kind of applying it on an ongoing way to what you're experiencing, because that will do a lot to deconstruct the shame about it. And to understand like, okay, maybe it's not that I am unable to do things. Maybe I need more rest. And maybe I need more rest than my sister or my friend or my partner, like, because I'm clearly in a state that they're not in. And so like understanding that, I think, is huge and foundational in the grand scheme of things. And then acutely, like there are things to do when you're inside of a state like that in the moment and can't seem to pull yourself out of it. And I'll give an example for the two different states. So I tend to run at this point in my life, just tend to run a little more on the anxious side. So I will be more prone to staying in the go kind of place. I can pretty easily stay there unless like I'm mindful enough to say like, we need to kind of come down a little bit. So my thoughts will get busy. And sometimes that's really helpful for me. Like I work and it helps my work. Again, that area of the nervous system can be productive. But if I notice that my thoughts are like getting really busy, or that I'm sort of like in a zone and I feel like I almost can't take a break, like I can't stop. Maybe I can't, I'm like, I'll just work through lunch, like, and I'm like, no, that's not good for me. Like I need to be able to kind of come down, like going right into the body. And I like to put one hand on my forehead and one hand behind my neck. And like the second, I've been doing this for so long that the second I do it, like things just start to slow. And there's a feeling a little bit of containment in that. And I usually get like a breath, which just came out. And again, like the first time I did that, nothing happened because my brain was too busy. But I've worked for a while on letting my body like have a voice a little bit more. So when I'm using these kind of techniques, the body's like, oh, thank you. Like, thanks. You recognized that like we're working really hard, that we're going too fast, that we need to take a break. I know what this means when you put your hands here. It means that you're listening and that you're trying to slow me down. So I'm going to take you up on that. And I'm going to like, my heart rate will decrease. My thoughts will like get a little quieter. I will be able to like put my shoulders down and sit back in my chair, right? Like after practicing this for a long enough period of time. So it can be like a practice you're trying out in the beginning, but it can eventually turn into something that like your body really like absorbs like a sponge. And it's kind of like, thank you for like stopping the thinking brain and turning on just the kind of the body awareness. For the freeze, that's where like your body really does just, it doesn't want to move. And so just giving yourself the space to like actually sit back, to actually lay down. I love to lay on the floor. This is something I've been doing actually since I was a teenager. And my parents used to be like, why are you on the floor? And I didn't know why. I just like I would used to like love to go on the floor and just like sit there or lay there. And now I understand that I really was actually trying to ground, literally. And sometimes I will still, like if I'm feeling really like I'm almost tipping over into that freeze, I will either lay down on the ground or sometimes I'll get in my bed and pull the covers up and just like cocoon for a little while and let myself do that free of charge, like free of like, you better get back, you better not worry. Why are you so, that's not helpful. But to give yourself 10 minutes of like free time to just be, to just lay, to just chill. And again, you have to work on that too, because there's going to be a lot of chatter about it. But if you think about it as like, this is a practice for my nervous system, that's what I'm doing right now. Sometimes that's like a way in. It'll bypass your intellectual, like shaming voice. Like, okay, she's actually doing something now. This isn't what it looks like.
It's almost like a productivity hack, but not really.
And you know what? If that's how you get in, then that's how you get in. Because a lot of people will feel like, I hear that from clients all the time. Like, I can't give myself permission to take a break. Like, I should be doing something. There's a lot of that in the world right now. So if you say, okay, you're not doing something, you're actually like restoring your nervous system. This is a practice that you're doing to see what happens when you do this for a week straight, or for, even just one afternoon when you're noticing that sluggishness come up. Give it time, because what the nervous system needs more than our brains do is time. The nervous system processes things so much slower. It needs more time to like understand like what's going on and to like work through it than your brain does. So giving it that time is really important, even though your brain will be running interference on that, telling you that you should be done by now. You should really be over this by now. But your nervous system's like, no, I beg to differ. Please just give me time and I'll prove it. So yeah, like these are just two like really, really, really simple techniques you can use in a moment, but they really they're more of those, the kind of thing that adds up over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really love both of those. I like the idea of cocooning. That sounds very cozy. And like, I think I need to do that a little bit too myself sometimes. I like how you said cocoon free of charge.
Yeah, because we all know it's usually not. We're usually like, oh, I'm so, and I have kids and that took me a long time to feel okay doing, especially, when like there's stuff to be done. But, I get overwhelmed as a parent and sometimes I need to, like, I just kind of tell my husband, I'm like, I just need 10 minutes and he gets it. He knows. And I'm like, and I go to my room and I pull the covers and I do. That is my little space. And I'm like, I'll be down in 10 more minutes, but right now I need to give myself permission to do this. And having learned to do it free of charge has like, then you don't need so much time. I used to lay in bed early like in my 20s and, my parents would be like, you're depressed, like what's wrong with you? And there's a lot of shame about that. When I realized that what I was trying to do was to just give myself space and time, it changed. I didn't need to like take up so much of it because I was actually allowing it to happen. It's kind of like the mental restriction kind of thing if in the eating disorder world. So giving it to yourself without shaming underneath it is a different experience than taking it and feeling like you're stealing it or like getting away with something.
Yeah, you need that full permission to really rest too, right? To let yourself give in to that moment. So while you're talking, I'm hearing all these people who are listening who are probably going to be thinking that like resistant side of things. I just am not someone who can do this. Like, this is not me. I need to go. I see the benefits of going. The world applauds me for this. There's so much on my shoulders. I just can't stop, right? That's like probably where a lot of people are right now. So just to help those individuals kind of open up to this, what are the benefits of having a regulated nervous system? Like, what are the benefits of coming down from that state? Maybe people aren't open to seeing the benefits, and I'm just trying to make sure those are really clear.
Good question. And what's funny too is like, I think if you're in the pattern of having really high highs and maybe really low lows as well, that middle regulated place can seem kind of boring. And like, yeah, I hear that word, like this boring idea about it, or just like dull. Being regulated, first of all, I will tell you that I didn't have access to this kind of regulation. I realize now since I was a child, right? Like this is not something that I've been in touch with to the extent that I am now. And it's life-changing in that, in not like a big fancy way. It's just life-changing in that you can actually be present when someone's having a conversation with you or when you're doing something that you enjoy, instead of that you're thinking, okay, like after this, I'm going to blah, 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 and okay. And you're like not even really there. You're just like, you're thinking about what's coming or you're perseverating on what's past or you're here, but you're not here. Having a regulated nervous system like actually allows you to be in a moment, like in your life. You're just here and now, and you're not in your head constantly. If you don't know what that experience is like or can't relate to it, it might be because you don't know what that experience is like or that you can't relate to it. And that it is it's almost like childlike in that, how kids just sort of like, they can just be, they're not worried about X, Y, and Z all the time. They're just like sort of enjoying their games or their whatever they're doing. It's like having a little bit of access to something a little more childlike, a little more fun, a little lighter. It's like you can laugh more easily in that state. You can relax more easily. You're actually much more flexibility in that you can mobilize to do something, but you can also de-escalate more quickly. So like you can perform. It's not like lack of performance. You can be in a flow state and get some work done and clean your house a little or whatever it is you need to do. But you can also like easily be able to like disengage from that and kind of like sit down and watch a movie. And like, you're not sitting in your head like the whole time thinking about what's the movie going to end so that I can do these other things. And then you can re-engage, there's some flexibility to it that allows you to just be more present and get more out of life in a way that's less stressful. Instantly, if you relate to feeling constantly stressed, it's just like, it's not an absence of stress, but it's just a lot more ease around that stress, a lot more feeling like I can. It's the part of the nervous system that's called I can, instead of like I have to, or I must, or I can't. It's like, I can, like, I'm here, I can do it. Like you have a little more resilience against stressors because you can manage them.
Beautiful. I love that. I like that distinction too of like the I can do this versus I have to.
Yeah, everything feels more like a choice and there's a little more space in it. Yeah. And like that feeling is, even as I talk about it, like, cause I'm on a podcast right now, like I can feel my system's a little up, but like when I remember that, you know, it's like the ability to like really be here and slow down and like relax your muscles a little bit.
I love that. Well, I'm hoping that the listeners can see that there are benefits to maybe slowing down, even though you might not feel like you're as productive for those few minutes you're taking care of yourself. But at the end of the day, being in that flow state, being in that resilient state is probably going to actually make you become like a more fulfilled human being.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. And it sounds so corny, but just as a quick example, the other day I had a lot to do. I had a lot of work and I was busy and I love my work. So I was doing it. But I had a gap of time like between the next time I had a client and what I was doing right then. And my husband was working from home and he was like, you know what? It's like, let's just take the afternoon and watch a movie. We're trying to watch all the Oscars before they come out. And at one time my other, I'm like, no, like I can't, like, no, I want to maximize everything. And I did sort of feel like this resistance. And then I was like, okay, like, let's do it. I can. And we did. And we watched this movie and it was such a good movie. And I cried and it was like, I'm so glad I watched it. And I feel like it spurred off a lot of conversations I've had since about this movie with a variety of different people. And then I went back into the work state and I was like, that was a nice day. Like I worked a bunch, but I also like watched this movie spontaneously. And like, that is part of what I love to do. Like I love to watch movies. It's part of living to me. And it just gives you a little more access into that. So you're not giving something up entirely. You're not giving up your passions and your busy, what you do enjoy doing. You're able to sort of also slow down and do other things and then move back into the doing without burning out in the process.
That's such a more balanced way of approaching your day.
I mean, I understand it's always not accessible to do it. It was like the stars aligned in that way, but it was that I could and that I could make that choice. Whereas I wouldn't have been able to do that before.
Well, it reminds me of this concept I keep bringing up, which is in my life, not on the podcast, but this idea of energy management and just knowing yourself and knowing where your energy is probably going to be at a certain point and when you need to take care of yourself and when you need to rest. Like, for instance, I just had my bachelorette party and I'm thinking about this group and like everyone's collective energy level. And like, I've been to those bachelorette parties where we have to do this, and we're going to do pole dancing class. And then we're going to do a drinking bike. And then we're going to go out and then we're going to go dance. And then it's like, so your energy is just gone. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to plan in some chill time, some balance time. And I take pride in like putting these agendas together that have this energy management piece where like people can go take a nap during this time, like little siestas built in. I mean, this sounds really funny in a way, but I like to say planned free time. Like just put some hour or hour and a half in your day where you can let go of work or let go of everything you've been stressing about. Watch a movie that you can connect with yourself, recharge, and then get back to it.
Yes. And you know how many people I feel like actually appreciate that? Like we have this idea that everyone wants to be entertained all the time. And like, like if you don't have your agenda completely full, it's somehow like, what's wrong with you? Or you're a loser? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's somehow this like bad thing. When in reality, I'm sure that, I don't know if your friends were like, thanks, because I feel like there's like a lot of relief in knowing like every second's not accounted for. Cause then we have like time scarcity or energy scarcity around like, I have to protect that now because there's no moment where I'm not having to be on. And I think in our brains, again, like it's a social expectation that are we all operating like that? Like, do we really want that? Or is it just kind of like the expectation,
Oh, such a good point. I love that because it's so true. People want a break. Like if it's their weekend or something and they're expected to go, like you have to bake in a little bit of rest. Like I do believe that's what people want. You don't want to be burned out by the time like Sunday comes around.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm an introvert, so I would be like, oh, if you planned for me some built-in rest time, I'd be like, thank God. Like, that is exactly what I need to show up for the events. You know what I mean? To actually be able to be fully there. So yeah, I'm all for that.
So I guess everyone listening, big takeaway here is, can you manage your own energy? Think of it as a limited resource that you want to protect and nurture throughout the day, because there's a limited amount of it, right? Day to day, you have to start taking care of yourself. So I think it's interesting how all of this relates to the nervous system and society at large, and how we are expected to go. And our nervous systems can match that. But in reality, we're going to be benefiting so much more from bringing ourselves down to that calmer state.
Yes. Our nervous systems can match it, but there tends to be like a cost at some point. So it's like kind of getting ahead of it and being able to give yourself the come down. But yeah, it's a little bit not mainstream to do that. So we have to forge ahead.
Yeah. Be proactive on your journey to bringing yourself back down to that connected, calmer place. So Stefanie, this has been so enlightening and interesting for me today. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice for people who are listening who are just starting to bring awareness maybe to this journey and learning about the nervous system? Like anything you want them to take away as we end this interview today?
I think like if this is something that resonates somewhere and it's new, a new concept, you don't have to also like go rush now to read every book about it and, like research this really in depth, or, to feel sort of anxiety about consuming that. Like I always say, like the term I use is like, leave the window open on it. Like when something piques your interest, you're interested in something, like allow yourself to just like open the window, like the breezes will come by and you'll be able to more readily sort of hear them because there's an openness to that now. And like, maybe there's something that like peaked in terms of like paying attention to something a little bit more, which is not to say like, I feel like, and I too would probably be like, I want to learn more about this. What's the next podcast I can listen to about that? But like, fair enough. But to also recognize that like, it's not like something you just learn overnight or you master overnight. You don't like get a hold of your nervous system overnight. Like there's time and to give yourself that time and to just like stay open to the messages that might come through on social media or on this podcast or wherever else that feel like it speaks to the heart of what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I love that analogy of keeping the window open, right? And letting the breezes drift in when this comes up, because it's such a gentle way to learn, right? And for people who are constantly on the go, it's not asking too much to just open the window.
You have to go and chase anything else. It'll come by and you're like, oh.
So good. I think this has been really helpful. And Stefanie, it's been a true pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And for those who are interested to stay in touch with you, is there a place you want to send listeners, like your website or Instagram or anything?
Yes. So I have a podcast as well. It's called Life After Diets for people in recovery from eating disorders. And I also have an Instagram account and a website. Both are I Am Stefanie Michele.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being so wonderful and joining me on the show today. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks, Meg.
You're welcome.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.